Gentlemen, your mission, if you decide to accept it, is to visit a Pontiac dealer in 1973.
Welcome back to Car-Pinionated, our weekly show on cars, the car industry, and driving in general, with a little bit of opinions thrown in there. I'm Doug Stewart. I am the digital executive producer. It's a new title, folks. I'm figuring it out. Digital executive producer for Fox 61 in Hartford. And with me are my friends Jeff Buchholz from WBBM in Chicago and Glenn Packman from beautiful Fairfield County, who is a noted comedian and car enthusiast. Gentlemen, a couple months ago, we did a thing I'm calling, and maybe I'll trademark it, car dealership time machine. And the idea behind this is to pick a year and a brand, and you get to go back in your time machine and buy 1, 2, 3, whatever cars at the car dealership at that time. So, Glenn, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm gonna do something like really I'm just gonna randomly pick a year off the top of my head and then a brand. So I'm going to say let's do Audi 1980. No, let's do a little later than that. Let's do 1992 Audi.
Okay.
Because I feel like Audi was sort of coming into their own 92, 93. Say 93 to be clear. Okay, 93. Go.
Oh, we have to do yours.
Oh, I have to do mine first? Oh, okay. Well, all right. Then I think what I'm sort of heading towards is Audi came out with the original A4 around that time frame, and that's what I'm sort of aiming towards. Audi hit like a heyday at that point in time because they had the A4 and the A6, the first iterations were both not only strikingly good looking cars, but really, really, really competent. And Audi was kind of in a heyday at that point in time. So if I had the money, it would have been an A6, but I never had the money, so it would have been an A4. I didn't have the money for an A4 back then either, but yeah.
The A8 is also.
Yeah. Oh my God. The original A8 was such a stunning car.
We've mentioned this before. It is that A4, that original A4, is just such a great design. It's really clean. It doesn't look like it's aged a day, and it is formed the basis of their design language for decades afterwards. Decades.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. Jeff, how about you?
Well, I mean, I was super excited when Glenn said Audi 93 because I would have gotten a last year Audi V8, which was the car that came before the A8, which was not sold till 96 in the US. The Audi V8 was and is an amazing car. It's very difficult to find now and almost indistinguishable from any of the other lineup, which is I think one of the secret sauces of the big Audi at that time is that it pretty much looked like any other Audi, and could kind of sail in under the radar. Okay, so I will select. Oh, okay. Gentlemen, your mission, if you decide to accept it, is to visit a Pontiac dealer in 1973. Shall I begin with my choice?
Go right ahead, because
This
it's
is
probably
actually
the same one.
This is actually, and this is unironically, a car that I have always wanted, and I don't know that I'll ever have one, but I came very close to buying one a few years ago and ended up not. It would be the new for 1973 Pontiac Grand Am in white with oxblood leather, real mahogany on the dash, and the 455 V8. This was essentially Pontiac deciding to turn its back on the GTO because the Firebird Trans Am was really taking a lot of the hot rod business and channeling that energy into a more grand touring kind of space. Never mind that a Pontiac Grand Am was 12 inches longer than literally anything on wheels in Europe at the time. It still felt like it was going to be a sort of a response to European touring cars, and especially with honeycomb wheels on it, looked the business. It was a great car. And some years ago, probably 20 years ago, I actually had a chance to buy a white 73 Grand Am and was not able to, which I still sort of am bummed about to this day, even though I had no place to put it. But it's a great car. It's a terrific car. It was such a watershed. And I'd still love to have one.
I would go with the 4-door of that.
Mm.
In either there was a dark green, I think.
Brewster Green, I think, is the one you're thinking of. Yes.
Yeah. And in that era, that was Pontiac's sort of European play. And the other divisions sort of had, something akin to that.
The Cutlass Salon would have been Oldsmobiles. You're right.
Right. And the Buick would have been the Regal at that point, the Century, whatever it was, and the I guess it must have been the Monte Carlo.
Chevy had the Laguna.
Okay, it was
the high end Colonnade car. Okay. There, 73, 74, 75.
So they had all those, and they're where they were aiming for was the Mercedes S-Class. I don't think they called it the S-Class specifically at that time, but like the 6.3. And Car and Driver did a road test of all 5 of these cars, and they said, well, this and that and the other thing, and it doesn't really do this, but this and that, whatever, right? So they go through, and then at the end they say, but Mercedes has moved the target and they're coming out with a new S-Class next year. So good luck, guys.
Yeah,
I'll just never
forget. And that S-Class, the W116, is also one of the great cars of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And one that has aged incredibly well.
Yeah. I remember going up to a Grand Am because the nose was all urethane. You could squeeze it.
Yeah,
probably all sorts of HR problems now, but okay.
Yeah. And problems for restorers now, because I think there's one company that makes replacement nose cones, and they are like a hard fiberglass. They're not like the Enduraflex from the new ones, or from the ones when they were new, is what I mean.
All right. Here's where I'm going. The year 1966, the dealership, Ford. Ooh. And I'm walking in there, and you guys both know that I love station wagons, that there is a Ford Country Squire there with the little horse on the front of the fender, and the Country Squire behind it, and the fake wood, and the vents that go around at the D pillars that go around and clear the air off the back the back window, and the magic door gate that would open as a door and it would go down as a tailgate, and your dual facing rear seats, because that way you can get more small children in there in a very unsafe area, and maybe not had seatbelts, but who cares? But we had a ranch wagon that was like way down on the list of what
that was because it went ranch wagon, country sedan, country squire, if I remember correctly.
But I just something about the style of that car and how it looked, and I like it way better than the 65, and they're not really that different, but that's what I would do. And while I'm there, I'd pick up 66 Mustang. Just because.
I love that answer. And boy, if you were going to buy a wagon, the Ford was the one to get, because that was That was
Yeah.
it, man. That was a really good
Yeah.
one. I would pick a 7-liter.
Okay.
The 7-liter coupe, which was basically the Galaxy 500 / LTD body style
With
with
the,
and the 427 V8
right, right, right.
or
Yeah.
428, I think is what it was. 427 was
Right.
Chevy. Yeah,
But that's a
that's what I
beautiful
would
roof
get.
line on that car. Just that sloping roof
Right?
line. That's
It's
really
on the way
nice.
to being like the sports roofs from the Mustangs and the Torinos of the early
Mm,
70s.
yeah, yeah, very much so. Very much so. All right, Mr. Glenn, we're going to go back to you, I think.
Yes, we're going to rocket forward a little bit. We're going to stay right in the Ford dealership, but as time whizzes past us and takes us to a wait, don't move, and there it is. And we're in a pretty rough year for Ford, but there are a couple of gems. 1978, because we had the last years of the Pinto. We had the end of the Mustang 2. We had, some big bargy cars, but there were two things that I felt were very compelling about Ford in 1978. First off, they started importing the Fiesta for a short period of time, which was a massively better car than anyone ever gave it credit for. Now, it wasn't revolutionary. It was, it was a small front wheel drive, pretty Spartan on the inside. I mean, it was a little economy car. I drove one of these and I had never had so much fun driving a little car in my life. It was notoriously quick for a car with very little under the hood. It handled like it was so light that it just any sort of input and the car just seemed to love it. It was German engineering that Ford didn't mess around with. And I always felt that the original Fiesta was a much more compelling car than the American public cracked it up to be. And I think it was because basically maybe we were moving out of the really small car realm already at that point. I'm not sure. But the other one, and this is just the polar opposite, this is American car making at its finest. I don't know. But that was the year they introduced the Ford Bronco. And the original
The upsized one.
Yes, the
Yeah.
upsized one. Yeah. And if you look at it, it almost looks sort of like a pickup truck with a permanent bed that's been jacked up onto a very, very, very high frame. I will say that the original Bronco had tons of clearance, and it's because they actually had, off-roading aspirations with this car. But it was the beginning of an era, I think, for Ford with that model. So it was an interesting year because it was a mix of good and bad, and I think Ford was a company going through a lot of changes at that point in time. And sometimes when you're experiencing a company, a band, an artist, a restaurant that's going through a transitional period, you get some very, very interesting results. I'm talking about Coldplay's X and Y album, by the way, as well. So totally. Yeah.
I love this period, Glenn, because it allows me to imagine the three of us as Charlie's Angels. Because it was during this period the show had a deal with Ford, and of course all the Angels drove Fords of this period.
Right. Each of the Angels had a different level of Mustang 2, and I think
Kate Jackson had a Pinto.
Right.
Sorry, Sabrina had a Pinto.
Sabrina had a Pinto. I thought she drove the little two-door coupe.
Nope.
No,
that was
Jacqueline Smith.
Was it?
Farah had the hatchback.
Yeah, the Cobra version of the hatchback.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think Bosley drove an LTD, if memory serves.
Probably. But you're right. It's a weird time for Ford because the downsized LTD was a year away. The Fairmont had come out and it was a reasonably decent selling car, but certainly nobody had any idea in 1978 that it was going to literally be the backbone of Ford's lineup for the next 15 years.
Right.
It's Ford's K car.
Yeah. It was Ford's K car in a lot of ways. They did a much better job disguising its origins under the Lincoln Mark 7, the Mustang to an extent, the Granada, the LTD, etc. And yeah, and I think the Capri 2 was gone by 78. I think
Think so.
77 was its last year. Um,
I believe you are correct. As a matter of fact, I have their lineup here. Hold on a minute. I just need to get to the top of this page, which I can do.
Tempting as it would be to pick a Granada ESS and fool all my neighbors into thinking I have a Mercedes WD-123. Google the ads, kids. They're just as funny as I make it sound. I probably would have picked a King Cobra.
Yeah,
Just because the graphics are good and I could get it with a V8 and a 4-speed.
sure,
Right.
sure.
I mean, and
You-
and by the way, the Mustang 2 does not deserve the hate it gets on Mustang.
No,
Absolutely, absolutely.
It was
Yeah,
the car. It was the car that needed to happen at the time it needed to happen,
right.
and it showed
Yeah.
just how brilliantly Iacocca was as a product guy.
Right.
Like
Not-
it was the
not the
car.
first-
It's the car that the only reason the Mustang exists now is because there was
Absolutely.
a Mustang 2 in the 70s.
Sure,
They
sure.
they
Yeah.
sold a lot of them and they kept the brand alive. I have said that before. I will say it again.
Mhm.
That's exactly that car. And you
Right.
can like it or hate it. I think it gets a lot more crap than it should.
Sure, sure. And you
Cool.
know, it's really Mustang purists that really detest this car because it's you know, it's not in keeping with what the old Mustangs were all about. They did try to make it all cars for all people, but it wasn't a terrible car. I mean,
Right.
it was based on Pinto underpinnings, but it was 10 times the car that the Pinto ever was, you
Yeah.
know.
And its suspension geometry, suspension parts are still used in a lot of hot rod builds
Wow.
and
Mhm.
resto mods to this day. Like
Yeah.
it was a good car. It really was.
And think about, you think about the Mustang, and we're getting off on a tangent, but that's fine. The first Mustang is a Falcon underneath. It's a compact. It's the Falcon, and it does that. Then the next one, like such perfect timing for such a bad period in American economics, was this smaller Mustang comes out right at the point where the gas prices are going through the roof,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And then is keeps the playing field where it is, sells a lot of cars, and then allows the Fox body Mustang to start in the
Mhm.
79.
Mhm.
A point about going back to the Blazer, I'm sorry, the Bronco.
Bronco.
Yeah.
There is a show that I think lasted a little bit more than a season, that you can still find on YouTube, called 240 Robert, starring John Bennett Perry, Matthew Perry's father, Joanna Cassidy, and Mark Harmon. And they drove around in these Broncos, a bunch of Broncos, like bouncing all over the street. And they had a helicopter. It was like a police Malibu Beach police thing. And it's typical crappy 70s television. But, the Broncos look great.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think in a lot of those kinds of shows, the cars and the motorcycles always fare better than the people do. Honestly, they always age better than the people, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, here's one. I got one for you. Your mission is to return to 1960, walk into a Chevrolet dealer, and pick something.
Ooh, ooh.
Hmm.
I'm typing.
I am walking out with a Corvette. Ralph Nader be damned.
You dare.
I am walking out of there. I am driving out of there in a Corvair 2-door, probably in red or something.
Mhm.
Because it's the future, or at least it seems to be in 1960s America. They basically took the idea of the Volkswagen Type 1 and made it an American car, and created a style, by the way, that influenced a whole bunch of European cars from the same period. If you look up the Simsa, the little NSU Prins from the same period, like they all have that kind of Corvair look about them. It was incredibly influential at the time. Very space efficient, pretty sporty.
Hugely
As long
so.
as you didn't,
Yep.
long as you knew how to brake into corners, you were fine. And not, as we learned much later, no more prone to rollover as other cars of that period, as it turned out. It was tricky because people didn't know how to drive it, but
And didn't
taken
you
as
also
an
have to have inflation, the tires had to be inflated to different?
tire pressure is an issue in a rear engine, especially aft engine car with swing axles. Porsche had that suspension on the early 911s, and they were a little temperamental as well. You know, but you know, other cars have been temperamental with tire pressure. The second gen Explorer comes to mind. And you know, but no, that's the one that I would get. That was a great, honestly, a great car. I think the second generation Corvair is much better looking, but I think in 1960, as we're coming out of the tail fin period, that's the one I'd have.
I don't remember what year, but I do remember the car that my grandfather had, a white one, an early Corvair, and was bought and Glenn will remember this, Carter Chevrolet, right down the street here.
Right.
And it said by Carter. That was the remember the metal plates for the dealers?
Yeah.
Riveted pop rivets on the car. And in my little mind, you know, being 4 or 5 years old, whatever, I thought the car was built there. You know?
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't know.
The Chevy dealer in Grand Rapids, Michigan had the same deal. It was like by Berger. They would throw it like right under the bow tie.
Yeah. And it was, you know, I remember that really well. I remember he really liked it. Like, both my grandfathers were great guys, but they had limited amounts of autonomy in their relationships. My other grandfather could buy the cars and the TV set. Big, you know, massive color TV that sat in the living room, and we watched Rudolph on it. But yeah,
Space Command remote.
No, they never went with the remote. I don't know why. But he, you know, every couple of years he'd go down to the bottom of the hill and buy TV from Molinsky's and get it. And it was yeah. I inherited that TV when they both had passed away, and so that one I would have gotten in 65, so 95, about 95 or so, and I had it until easily 2005. I had it for a good, you know, good long period of time, and it was old when I got it.
Yeah. God, I'd love to have one as a console table now.
All right, so I'm going way back in the time machine, and I'm gonna have to the 1941 Lincoln Continental.
Oh my God.
You know, just you know, black, tan roof, just gorgeous. Any way you look at it, any way, you know, it's like one of the perfect cars. I just don't, you know, I can't say anything more about it. It hasn't already been said, but just the look of that, the elegance, the design, timeless.
And yeah, I mean, and generally accepted as one of the best looking cars of all time. I mean, just elegant in a way that cars really weren't at that time.
Right.
Yeah, just kind of effortless beauty.
Yes,
Fantastic.
exactly. All right. Who's next? I always lose track. I'm sorry. I always lose track.
No, that's
of which way
fine.
we
I
go.
think Glenn is next.
Okay. We jump in the time machine. We go to a Mazda dealership in 1993. You know, I'm sorry, did I say 93? 83. Good year for Mazda. Not only did we have the original RX-7 with the very pointy front end, kind of an iconic car, but in keeping with the fact that I love unexpectedly fun small cars, also available that year at Mazda, would have been the GLC Sport. And the GLC was a rather mediocre car, but the Sport version, Mazda spent a little bit of time tuning the suspension. They blacked out the trim. They made it, I think they may have even lowered it just a tiny bit. It was,
Yeah.
it was actually, for a little hatchback, they did a very good job sort of sharpening it up. So
The
um,
the sedan in that line looks especially good too.
yeah, yep, yep. Definitely a forerunner to the Protege, which would have been 1993, by the way, which I actually owned.
Yeah, and
Um,
I was thinking, you're talking about Mazda 93. I'm like, Mazda 93 was full of bangers, man.
yeah, no.
Miata,
Yeah.
Yeah.
MX3 with a little V6 engine in it,
Yeah.
the Navajo, which the best of the Explorer variants, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
The MX6, which
Yep.
was a fine coupe if you liked the Ford Pro but hated the name, as we discussed in a previous podcast.
Right.
The 929 was out at that time.
Right.
And they still were selling B series pickups. I mean, it was a good lineup, man.
It was. It
Mhm.
was. Yeah. I
83, I would still take, I think, a B series pickup
yeah.
just to be an off the
Is that
beaten path. I'd probably take an RX-7, but you took one, so I'll take the pickup.
Okay.
the B series pickup? Was that like the second gen of it?
Yes.
And most of them came with the graphics on the side, like the diagonals on the side.
Yes.
Yeah, my friend Tim Johnson had one. Boy, was that a good truck. He really, really liked that. It was a
It
good
was
run.
good enough. They were good enough for Ford to sell for years as couriers for 2 generations until they got the Ranger up.
Yeah. And then gave it to Mazda.
Exactly.
No, the one I was thinking about, Glenn, was the 88 Mazda 323 GTX 3-door
That is a
hatchback.
great car. That's
Okay.
a good
I'm
car.
gonna look that up.
Yeah.
That's sensational.
Yeah.
I just saw one come up for sale somewhere not long ago. I can't remember
Searching.
where. But yeah, that one's sweet.
All right.
Let's see.
Who's
Oh
next?
yeah. Oh,
I am, and I want to go to. I would be interested. I'm really interested in other viewpoints here because I would like to go to a Dodge dealership in 1969. This is during a period of time when Dodge was selling one of the best looking cars of the 60s. But that's not the one I want. The one I want is the first year of the fuselage uh, Polaris / Monaco, probably the Monaco with the one sort of third weird headlight that they sold for like a year and a half before the feds decided that might have been illegal.
And they could never sell them in Connecticut.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've sort of over time I've developed a fondness for those fuselage Chryslers in the late 60s, early 70s periods, the big full-size ones. I thought they were pretty cool. I think the Monaco would be a great one to have. And I will leave the Charger RT, the best looking car of the 60s, to
Yeah.
someone else.
Yeah. I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah,
because-
Do me
Go
a
ahead.
favor, don't General Lee it.
No.
Maybe put a US flag on top, call it the General Grant. That might
There you go.
work.
There you go. Yeah. Little did we
Yeah.
know back
Mm.
then, but
Yeah.
it's funny. When I did the search for Dodge 1969, the only images that came up were one Charger after another. But I vaguely remember the Monaco, and it's interesting. That is a
Mhm.
very interesting car.
It had presence, you know,
did.
and it
all those,
looked,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, and it looked a little more modern than the GMs, because the GM redesign was coming in 71. And the Ford was on the way as well, but it hadn't quite gotten there. The Ford was also 71, I think.
And it looks athletic.
Mhm.
And that's when I come down to like that's that indefinable quality of the 1972 mid-sized GM products,
Pinnacle,
the
yes.
Chevelle, just it has this,
All
yeah.
Mhm.
And of course in 1969 you can't get away without mentioning the Dart Swinger.
Mhm.
Yes, I was trying to, but thank you for keeping me honest. That's true. That's true. We're a little bit ahead of the sort of the groundbreaking Plymouth version of that, the Duster, which actually
Right.
did real numbers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was a really sweet little car too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
And now people these days would know it in the Liberty Mutual commercials
yes, that's
with
what
the
Doug drives.
ostrich.
Yes, Emu, the ostrich.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
cassowary. What?
All right, my turn.
Sure.
All right, I'm gonna stay in the Pentastar era of lane, if you will. 1993 Chrysler. And there's a bevy of
Hmm.
ones there. I mean, that I still think, and I've mentioned this before, that's a real high point in Chrysler's, going. They
Mhm.
have all the new LHs at that
Mhm.
point. They have, down the street at the Dodge dealership, the Ram pickup truck redesign is about to come out.
Yeah.
The minivans look great,
Mhm.
I'd go with a the Chrysler LH. It's before like the 300 and the European spec one that they
The
had on.
300M, right. The
Right,
Eagle
right,
and the Eagle Vision. So you're talking about the LHS,
right,
the
right.
longer wheelbase
Yeah, yeah.
Chrysler.
Which I think is like a couple of years from them, but all those any one of those LHs, and I have sort of have a particular fondness for the Eagle one, but
Mhm.
I just think headlights were pretty poor, but I think they
Sure.
all had this great look,
Mhm.
and it's totally borrowed from some AMC Renault product that they rebodied, and you'd never know it.
Yeah,
Just
they totally ripped off the platform or the design anyway of the Eagle Premier.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So anyway, that
those
would be my
AMC guys were
choice.
onto something.
And by the way, we have this Jeep if you want it.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, we'll take that.
Mhm.
But that's what I got. Anyone else got one?
Can I wrap up my fun to drive small car
Absolutely.
memorabilia? Let's go to Volkswagen 1976 and talk about the VW
Ooh.
Scirocco for just a moment,
Mm.
because with the exception of the round headlights, I think if they built that car today, it would still look fresh and exciting. It's
Mhm.
just, I wanted one of the, I didn't even know how to drive. I was 14, okay? And I desperately, desperately wanted one of these cars. It was another one of my car crushes and another fun, pitchable, peppy, crazy little car, you know? Um, they had that was the second year of the Rabbit at that point too,
Mhm.
which kind of took
Yes.
America by storm because it was sort of reverse snobbery. You know, it was we saw a lot of us Connecticutians, as we're called, driving these cars because it was
You're
sort of
not called that.
we
You're not.
are, we are. That's supposedly what people from Connecticut are called,
Oh,
Connecticutians.
that's
Yeah,
what people from New York say. People from Connecticut are called. We're just not.
us
Anyway,
nutmeggers,
there you
I
go.
the
I'll go with that.
You are your love for the Volkswagen Scirocco of all generations is extremely well documented because you've
yeah.
mentioned in a previous episode of this podcast you would
Yeah,
bring one over from Europe.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Um,
Yes, the current version.
my
Yeah,
recollection is that the Scirocco, which was also an Ital design
yes,
creation,
yes.
Mhm.
Giugiaro did that, and the
Giugiaro
Dasher
definitely,
and
yes.
the Golf. They brought the Scirocco out first to get people ready for the design that became the Golf slash Rabbit.
Really
Yes.
Mhm.
interesting. I
Uh-huh.
always thought the Rabbit was first.
No, Scirocco
No,
actually
they.
was introduced in 74.
No
Mhm.
kidding. Well,
And
there's the
yeah,
thing I learned today.
to
Wow,
replace the Carmen Ghia.
Mhm.
wow, wow. Very,
Yeah.
my recollection would have gone back to the Rabbit being introduced first, but I was, young and stupid. So hey,
Look,
that's incredible.
I sentimentally I would get a Rabbit. My mother had a 75 Rabbit,
Oh yeah.
which she got. I was in fourth grade, fifth grade. It was like 78 or 9. And I had literally outgrown the Carmen Ghia she was driving.
Yeah.
I could no longer fit in the back seat as, you know, a 10 or 11-year-old who was already, you know, on his way to being 6'2". So another car was needed, and that's what she wound up with in this really great 70s perfect red orange color,
Yeah.
with black leatherette interior. And that thing was great.
Yeah.
I love that little rabbit. That thing was cute.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First, the first generation of Golf/Rabbit that we got here in the United States was just
Mm,
it was just it was an exceptional car. It
mhm.
was it really helped define the small car market too, because everybody suddenly came out with their version of the
Well,
Rabbit.
that's why Ford brought the Fiesta in.
Exactly. Exactly.
Even though the
Very
Fiesta was
similar
a
car.
half size smaller than the Golf slash
Right.
Rabbit, because
Right.
it competed with the Polo in the next segment down.
Right.
And but
Exactly.
you're right. I mean, it did that, and it sort of helped speed to market, literally, the Dodge and Plymouth twins,
Mhm.
the L
The
cars,
L
the
car.
Omni and Horizon, which were powered by Volkswagen engines at one point.
Right.
And that became kind of the default form factor for a lot of economy cars, certainly
Right.
going into the 80s.
For sure.
I,
Hey,
I,
quick question. Dodge Plymouth imported the Colt/Champ.
Mhm.
They were
From
not,
Mitsubishi, correct?
they were Mitsubishi products. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
I was just going through
they
my
owned
mind.
they owned a stake in Mitsubishi, I
Right.
believe, at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
had a lot of Mitsubishi products,
Oh my
just a
word.
ton of them.
Dating
They were,
back to the Plymouth Cricket of 1971 or 2, which, oh no, that wasn't a
that was
Mitsubishi.
a European, that
That
was
was the
a
Roots, that was
Hellman
Roots
invented.
Group. That was a
Yeah,
Hillman,
yeah.
you're right. Yep,
But
Roots Group in
there was
UK.
a
But the
there
Colt,
was a
certainly,
scamp,
was the Plymouth. You're right.
and that was the Mitsubishi.
Yes.
Okay.
The Scamp and the
Yeah.
Colt were both Mitsubishi products.
The,
They are no, the
the
Champ.
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 Right.
Sorry.
The
Scamp
Scamp, like
was
a
a
Duster.
Valiant. Was a
A Valiant.
Valiant. It was the
Valiant.
Valiant version of the Dart Swinger.
Right.
That
Mhm.
name is back.
Yeah.
You're right. The Plymouth Champ and the Dodge Colt were the little hatchbacks with the twin stick transmission.
Correct,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
what brought this up as a memory is that a neighbor of ours, in responding to the gas crisis, got one of these, a little Plymouth Champ, and they spent way too much money on it. And that was the thing, was that these little cars that got good gas mileage were just selling like hotcakes. So
Yeah,
it was when that turnover was happening. But
yeah,
I think the Rabbit was what ushered in so many of these smaller
Mhm.
cars, into the
yeah.
US market. So
And done in a move of desperation on Volkswagen's part.
really,
An absolute moment where they had a 40-year-old design, 40 more year old design that was clearly well past its prime, that was
sure,
still selling, but had definitely trailed off in a market where there were a lot of new and interesting and unique cars that weren't round, but they were small, and they had to come up with something, and to start to really take, like, you consider all the different Volkswagen type 1 variants along that path, the bus, the squareback,
Square
or
back.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure,
all
sure.
those. And then to start and say, it's not just a clean sheet design. We went and made new paper. We're sitting there and we're like, it's going to be water cooled, it's going to be front wheel drive, and it's going to be square, and all these things. Everything that the Beetle or the Bug wasn't existed is now changed for the Golf and the Rabbit,
Right.
and it saves them, right?
yeah.
It saves them, and keeps them going until the next crisis that they
Right.
have.
And
Because
well, yeah, and that would not have happened had Volkswagen not purchased Audi and NSU in the
Mhm.
60s. And
right,
basically their first front drive water-cooled car was an NSU car that they rebadged as a Volkswagen and sold for a little while, and that helped them figure out how to make that car, and then
Sure.
they ran with it.
Right. And I seem to recall that the Rabbit was like the first really truly successful front driver in the United States. I may be wrong, but
well, in a mass market sense, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there had been the Cords had been front drive, and of course the Tornado and Eldorado had been front drive since the mid 60s. But in a mass market sense, you're exactly right.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And again, ushered in so much. And
Mhm.
I just wanted to pick the two-door sporty version of that.
Mhm.
Because that's my wheelhouse. So, but yeah, an important time for Volkswagen, which goes back to our Volkswagen podcast. Look it up. It's somewhere, on the internet. Doug can tell you more.
You know that
Yeah.
because you all know that, folks, because you follow this podcast, or you should.
Right.
And you know how you can follow the podcast?
Tell
You
us.
can-
How, Doug? How?
You can like and subscribe, and
Let
we have
them
a
know.
whole list of playlist of Car-Pinionated episodes that you can enjoy at your leisure. And sometimes on Fox 61 Plus, because I program Fox 61 Plus, there's a Car-Pinionated marathon that happens on weekends sometimes. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. All right, gentlemen, this has been great. We will be back at some point in the near future. And we will all bid you all a fond good night.